Today is your first day as the owner of a shopping mall. Just a few days ago, you signed the deal. Now you're responsible for 40 acres of parking, two major anchor department stores, and 140 retail stores. At first glance, everything looks perfect. You think the rent checks will start rolling in every month, and before long, you'll be rich. But the shopping mall business isn't nearly that simple. Some malls make their owners tens of millions of dollars every year, while others slowly become completely empty. So how does a shopping mall actually make money? And can it really make you rich? Now let's say you've officially bought the mall. The next question is simple. Where does the money actually come from? At first, the answer seems obvious. Stores lease space in your mall, pay rent every month, and the more stores you have, the more money you make. But the reality is far more complicated. This is the number that convinced you to sign the deal. A shopping mall of this size, if it's fully leased, can generate more than $18 million a year from tenant rent alone. Then add parking fees. Add revenue from advertising screens and billboards. Add the company that pays to host holiday markets, exhibitions, and seasonal events in your center court. When you stack all of that together, the $120 million purchase price suddenly doesn't seem so unreasonable. You start doing the math in your head. $18 million a year. At that rate, the mall could pay for itself in about 7 years. After that, it's nothing but profit. Or at least, that's what it feels like.
But here's what you actually bought. You didn't just buy a building. You bought 140 separate business relationships, and every single one of them has the potential to go wrong. Let's start with the two anchor stores, because they're the foundation of the entire mall. You'd probably assume the biggest department stores are also your biggest rent checks. They're not. In many shopping malls, anchor stores pay little to no rent. Some pay as little as $1 per year. And in some cases, they actually own their own buildings and pay the mall owner nothing at all. So you just spent $120 million on a shopping mall where the two largest stores might not be paying you any meaningful rent. And surprisingly, that's not a flaw in the business. That's exactly how the shopping mall business was designed to work. You start to understand why the moment you look at what everyone else is paying. The small stores, the ones squeezed between the anchors, the phone case kiosk, the sunglasses shop, the regional chain selling athletic wear. They're paying rent per square foot that's 5, sometimes 10 times higher than what the anchor pays for the exact same building. Why would anyone agree to that? Because the anchor isn't a tenant. The anchor is bait. People don't drive 20 minutes to visit a mall. They drive 20 minutes to visit the department store, and the mall is just what happens to be wrapped around it. Every one of your smaller tenants is paying you, essentially, for proximity to somebody else's customer. That's the first thing nobody tells you on your first day. You're not really renting out stores. You're renting out foot traffic that you didn't create and don't control. There's a second detail buried in those leases that makes the anchor arrangement even stranger. And it's the kind of thing you only notice once you start reading the fine print at midnight. Most of your small tenants aren't just paying a flat rent. They're paying what's called percentage rent, a base amount plus a cut of whatever they sell above a certain threshold, which means every quarter, dozens of store managers are legally required to hand you their actual sales figures. And you start to realize you know more about how well the sunglasses shop is doing than the sunglasses shop's own regional manager does. You're not just a landlord anymore. You're sitting on a live feed of consumer behavior for an entire trade area. And that data, it turns out, is worth almost as much to advertisers and analysts as the rent itself.
So now the picture shifts. Your income isn't just rent, it's a bet that people keep showing up to browse a store that barely pays you anything. And the moment that bet gets shaky, everything downstream of it gets shaky too. This is where the actual costs start to introduce themselves. And they don't come one at a time, they come in a pile. Property taxes on a mall this size can run into the 7 figures annually, reassessed upward almost every time the property changes hands, which it just did. Insurance on a structure this large, covering slip and fall liability across 140 stores worth of foot traffic, is its own 6-figure line item before you've paid a single utility bill. And then there's the part almost nobody budgets for correctly the first time. Maintenance on a building engineered to stay lit, heated, cooled, and clean 16 hours a day, every day, forever. HVAC systems the size of small houses, escalators that require certified technicians on retainer, a roof measured in acres, not square feet, that needs replacing on a schedule, whether you're ready for it or not. Add it together, and your $18 million in revenue starts shedding weight fast. Common area maintenance costs, taxes, insurance, marketing, and management fees can eat well over 1/3 of gross income before you've paid a cent toward the mortgage on the building you just bought. And you did finance most of it, because nobody pays $120 million in cash. So now there's a loan payment sitting on top of everything else,
sized to a property that was appraised assuming full occupancy and healthy anchors. Which brings us to the sentence that changes everything. The one you don't fully feel the weight of until 18 months in. One of your anchors is closing. It's not dramatic when it happens. No press conference, a memo, a lease notice, a closing date 8 months out, delivered by a regional real estate director who has never once set foot in your building. You read it twice, standing in the same atrium where you felt rich on day one. Except now it's a Tuesday afternoon. The escalators are running for maybe 30 shoppers total, and the number in your head isn't 18 million anymore. It's the loan balance. But watch what happens to the math. That anchor wasn't paying you much rent directly, remember? So on paper, it looks like a small loss. It isn't. The moment that department store goes dark, the foot traffic that justified every single one of your high-paying small tenants starts evaporating with it. This is called a co-tenancy clause, and it is the single most dangerous sentence buried in almost every lease you signed as landlord. It says, in effect, if the anchor leaves, the small tenants get to pay reduced rent or leave entirely without penalty. You didn't just lose one tenant, you just triggered an exit clause across dozens of leases at once, and you have somewhere between 6 months and 2 years to find a replacement anchor before the entire property starts a spiral that across America over the last decade has quietly killed off hundreds of malls just like yours. Empty anchor, reduced rent tenants, reduced foot traffic, more vacancies, lower valuation, harder to refinance. It happens slowly, then all at once, and it is the exact story behind every so-called dead mall you've ever driven past with a cracked parking lot and a fence.
Around the food court. So here's the honest question sitting in front of you now, 18 months into ownership, watching one anchor's parking spots sit empty. If the margins are this thin and the risk is this structural, why do the biggest names in real estate keep buying more of these, not fewer? Why does a company like Simon Property Group own a portfolio of hundreds of them and keep expanding in an era when everyone insists retail is dying? Because you've been thinking about this building the wrong way. And so did everyone who watched you sign that paperwork feeling like a retailer. You're not in the retail business. You never were. You're in the real estate business. And retail is just the tenant. Look at what the biggest players actually do when an anchor dies on them. Because it's the exact opposite of what happened to you. When a department store chain shuts locations across the country, the malls owned by large REITs don't sit there absorbing an empty box for 3 years. Take a typical case. A dead department store, dark for 18 months, sitting behind a chained gate while lawyers argue over the lease. A REIT buys back the box, splits it into 3, and within a year, that same footprint holds a fitness chain, an urgent care clinic, and a self-storage operator. 3 separate rent checks, replacing the one that vanished. The traffic changes, but the rent check doesn't stop. Because the building was never really about selling clothes. It was always just square footage in a location people already drive to. And square footage can be sold to anyone with a reason to be there. You didn't have the capital, the relationships, or the time horizon to pull that off on one property. They do it across 100 properties simultaneously, which means the failure of any single anchor barely shows up in the numbers. The actual money in mall ownership rarely comes from the enclosed building at all. It comes from the parking lot, specifically the edges of it, those freestanding pads out by the road, the bank branch, the fast food drive-through, the standalone chain restaurant. Those tiny slivers of your property, called out parcels, generate some of the highest income per square foot on the entire site, often several times what the interior stores pay. Because a restaurant with a drive-through doesn't need foot traffic from your mall at all. It needs visibility from the road. And you're charging it rent for real estate you already owned for free. The smartest mall owners treat the enclosed building almost like an amenity, a traffic generator, while the real profit engine sits quietly around its edges, one lease at a time. And there's a second layer most first-time owners never see coming, because it has nothing to do with rent at all. The building itself is a financial instrument. Once a mall is stabilized, generating predictable income, an owner can refinance it, pulling cash out based on the property's current appraised value, often without selling a single square foot. That cash doesn't count as taxable income the way rent does. It's debt, secured against an asset that keeps generating income to service it. This is how real estate fortunes actually compound, not by selling, by borrowing against value that keeps rising, over and over,
while the underlying property keeps paying for itself through rent. It's the same reason billion-dollar REITs don't panic over one closed anchor the way you did. They have 20 other properties, dozens of outparcels, and access to capital markets you don't. When one location wobbles, the portfolio absorbs it. You bought one mall. They own the model. That's the gap. Not intelligence, not effort, structure. You did everything a smart, careful owner would do. You read the leases. You budgeted for maintenance. You still ended up exposed to a single anchor's decision made in a boardroom you've never seen in a city you've never visited because your entire $120 million asset was quietly built on top of someone else's foot traffic. So can owning a shopping mall actually make you rich? Yes, but not the way you pictured it on that first morning in the empty atrium. It doesn't make you rich through rent checks from 140 grateful tenants. It makes you rich the way land has always made people rich, slowly, through leverage, through the pads around the parking lot, through refinancing value you didn't have to sell, and only if you survive long enough, with enough scale, to absorb the day an anchor leaves without it taking the whole property down with it. The people who get wealthy from malls were never really selling retail space. They were selling proximity to traffic they didn't create on land they controlled completely. And that first day, holding keys that felt heavier than they should have, standing under those skylights nobody's looking up at yet, that's the one thing you hadn't figured out. You're not the store owner. You're not even really the landlord. You're the person who owns the road everyone else's customers happen to walk down.